After a night of tangled passion with a wealthy heiress from the upper crust, she ended up pregnant with twins. Taking advantage of her weakness after childbirth, I quietly slipped away, taking one of the babies with me. 5 years later, due to a corporate transfer, I was relocated from the overseas branch back to the corporate headquarters. "Son, you stay home and play with the nanny. Dad has to go out to sign a contract, but I'll be back very soon," I said. My son, holding a toy bubble gun in his hands, was running unsteadily around the living room. As he ran, he made shooting noises with his mouth and called back to me, telling me not to worry. Right after I signed the contract and came downstairs, I saw a strange woman forcibly shoving my son into a green sedan. I rushed forward in a few large strides, snatched my son back, and held him close. He clung to my chest, tears spinning in his eyes. When we got home, I was giving my son a bath when my phone suddenly started ringing off the hook. As soon as I answered, my son's sweet, milky voice came through the speaker. "Dad!" The hand holding my phone froze instantly. I stood there, utterly paralyzed, my mind completely blank. If my son wasn't at home, then who on earth was the child sitting quietly in my bathtub right now? Before I could even speak, my son on the other end of the line was still talking, sounding incredibly wronged. Before I could process anything, the little boy in the bathtub whispered softly, telling the voice on the phone not to be afraid. My eyes widened in absolute shock as I stared at the child in the tub. "How do you know all this?" I asked. As soon as the words left my mouth, a sudden realization hit me, and panic gripped my heart. I spoke with a dry, uncertain voice. "The auntie my son mentioned, could she be your mother?" The little guy nodded gently, his face completely expressionless. But that single nod acted like a bomb detonating in my chest. My vision went black for a second. What kind of twisted fate was this? The child I had brought back wasn't my son at all. My biological son had actually been taken home by that woman, and the child I was currently holding in my arms was hers. I tried to steady my breathing. Just as I was about to say I would take him back and swap them immediately, both my son on the phone and the little guy in the bathtub shouted at the exact same time, "No, I don't want to!" I looked at the phone, then looked down at the bathtub, where the little boy's eyes were darting around nervously. He stayed silent for a few seconds before whispering a pleading request. "Can I just stay for one day? Just one. I want to experience what it feels like to have a dad." Those words were like a needle piercing straight into my heart. I couldn't bring myself to say no. I thought of my own son, who had grown up without a mother by his side all these years. Did he also secretly long for a mother's presence? Right then, my son on the phone suddenly cheered with joy. "This is too perfect." I was both angry and amused, wishing I could reach through the phone and flick him on the forehead. This silly boy, taken to a stranger's house, and he was actually happy about it. He had zero defenses. Wasn't he afraid of being kidnapped? The two children, as if they had discussed it beforehand, began begging me together. "Please, mister, just for one day." I was taken aback by how remarkably in sync they were. Looking at those two pairs of eyes filled with expectation, I simply couldn't bear to refuse. I let out a helpless sigh. "All right, as long as you are both safe, just for one day. Tomorrow night, you two must swap back." Having secured my promise, my son happily hung up the phone. I looked down at the little guy in the bathtub, and my voice involuntarily softened. "What's your name?" "Mom calls me Julian," the little boy answered quietly. "Does Julian normally sleep by himself, or do you need someone to stay with you?" I asked. Julian gently shook his head. Acting like a miniature adult, his tone was far too steady for a 6-year-old. "I started sleeping by myself when I was 3. I don't need anyone to keep me company. I'm very brave." My heart ached at those words. The contrast was stark. Even now, my son still needed me to sit with him, tell him stories, and pat his back before he could fall asleep. Yet Julian, at such a young age, had already been forced to learn independence. After turning off the lights, I walked out of Julian's room and stood by the door, observing him carefully. It was then that I realized something. Although Julian and my son looked exactly alike, their auras were entirely different. My son loved to move and talk, his eyes full of innocent, carefree joy. Julian, however, was exceptionally quiet and composed, carrying a maturity in his eyes that didn't belong to a child his age. It was as if he had been burdened with invisible shackles far too early. I comforted myself by thinking their identical looks were just a coincidence. After all, aren't there always news stories about strangers who happen to look exactly alike? I figured there wouldn't be any other complications. I never could have imagined that this so-called coincidence was a script written by destiny long ago. The next morning, I made Julian all of his favorite breakfast foods. Watching him take small, polite bites, my heart completely melted. I decided that for this one day, I would try to fulfill every single wish he had, so he could truly experience the joy of having a father by his side. During the day, you can pick anywhere you want to go, and I'll go with you. How does that sound? I asked. Julian's eyes instantly lit up, like stars suddenly igniting in the night sky. Disbelief washed over his little face. Really? We can go anywhere? I promise I'm not lying to you, I assured him. I want to go to the zoo, and then to the amusement park. Can we? Julian's voice carried a cautious, fragile hope, terrified that I might say no. When he saw me nod firmly, he finally let out a happy cheer, acting like a normal child for once. A brilliantly radiant smile bloomed on his face. I felt a pang of sorrow. It seemed his mother truly rarely took him to places like this. He treated such simple, everyday joys as something incredibly precious. Our first stop was the zoo. Along the way, the light in Julian's eyes never dimmed. Usually a boy of few words, the moment he saw the tigers, lions, giraffes, and red pandas, he proactively grabbed my hand. With vibrant enthusiasm, he explained the habits and traits of all the animals to me. His little mouth didn't stop moving, and his eyes were full of unbridled curiosity about the world. After leaving the zoo, we headed to the amusement park. He dragged me onto the bumper cars again and again, crashing into me until I was dizzy and my stomach churned uncomfortably. Finally, unable to take it anymore, I raised my hands in surrender. Julian, spare me. If we crash again, I'm really going to throw up. Julian didn't feel dizzy at all. He reached out his little hand and gently patted my back, looking entirely serious. But I still want to play. This is so much fun. The sun slowly began to set, casting our long shadows across the pavement. My legs were so weak I could barely stand. Holding Julian's hand, we slowly walked out of the amusement park. I crouched down to look him in the eye and asked softly, "Were you happy today?" Julian nodded emphatically, but then slowly shook his head. I looked at him in confusion. "Why are you happy and unhappy at the same time?" Julian's eyes began to redden, and he sniffled, his voice thick with tears. "I know you have to take me home now. I was so happy today, but thinking about how I won't get to see you again makes me really sad." He hesitated for a moment, then reached out, gently tugging at the corner of my shirt. He whispered, "I wish you were my dad." My chest tightened with sour grief, and my eyes grew hot. I reached out and patted his soft hair, comforting him gently. "If we ever get the chance to meet again in the future, I'll take you out to play again, okay?" Julian nodded forcefully. The tears he had been holding back finally spilled over, but he still tried his hardest to smile at me. Following the address Julian gave me, I drove to a high-end villa district. The security here was incredibly strict, and every single mansion looked imposing and majestic. It was obviously the area where the wealthiest people in the capital lived. At the main gate, I called my son's smartwatch, keeping my voice low. "When no one is looking, sneak out quietly so Julian can hurry inside. You two need to swap back secretly. Don't let anyone catch you." As Julian walked through the gate, he turned around and waved at me vigorously, his little face full of reluctance. Looking at those two nearly identical little faces, I felt a confusing mix of sorrow and tenderness. It was a very bitter feeling. Just at that moment, through the gap in the villa gates, a familiar silhouette began walking toward the entrance. My heart skipped a beat, and my blood felt like it had turned to ice. It was actually her. The famous princess of the capital's sterling family, Serena. Almost completely on instinct, I grabbed my son's hand, which was still waving in the air, turned around, and walked away as fast as my legs could carry me, keeping my head down. I had been such a fool. How could there possibly be such a perfect coincidence in the world? Two children looking exactly the same, having such a strong natural connection, and even liking all the same things. This wasn't just a resemblance, this was blood. The moment I laid eyes on Serena, everything fell into place. Julian was the other twin boy she had given birth to, and the child I had rescued 5 years ago, the one I had taken away by a twist of fate, was indeed my biological son. After 5 long years, I never expected to be reunited with my other son in such an absurd, dramatic way. As I walked rapidly, my mind was in complete turmoil, a chaotic mess of thoughts. When I fled the country with my son all those years ago, I thought I would never have any ties to the Sterling family again for the rest of my life. But fate had dragged me back to the capital, right back into her orbit. While I was lost in my thoughts, my son bounced over, held my hand, and began chattering away again. "Dad, this experience was magical. She and I look exactly alike, and even her mom didn't notice. She has a mom but no dad, and I have a dad but no mom. What a coincidence, right? Dad, you have no idea. Her mom is incredibly strict. She makes her wake up at 5 in the morning. Piano class at 9, English at 10:30, and logic classes at 2 in the afternoon. Earlier, she even made me memorize some huge paragraph about theories. She said if I couldn't remember it, I wouldn't get to eat. Thank goodness you came to swap us in time, otherwise I really would have gone hungry tonight." The more I listened, the angrier I became. My fists clenched tightly at my sides. Julian was only 6 years old. It was the perfect age to play and be rambunctious. Yet Serena was forcing him to take so many grueling classes. No wonder he acted so mature at such a young age. It had all been forced onto him. Looking down at my son beside me, completely unburdened by worries, I suddenly felt a deep, piercing hatred for the man I was 5 years ago. Why had I been so useless? Why didn't I have the ability to take both children away, to let them grow up together by my side? They wouldn't have had to be separated, and Julian wouldn't have had to endure such harsh discipline. But reality was cruel. Back then, I had absolutely nothing. Just keeping one child alive required every ounce of my strength. I had zero capacity to care for 2. Leaving the other child with the Sterling family meant he would at least never worry about food or clothes, and he would enjoy the best material life possible. That was the best choice I could come up with at the time. But thinking about how unhappy Julian had been all these years, guilt washed over me like a tidal wave, drowning me completely. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. The kindergarten sent out a notice for a parent-child sports day on Friday, making it mandatory for parents to attend. I specifically cleared my schedule, pushing back all my work to ensure I had the whole day free to fully participate with my son. Early Friday morning, my son and I put on the matching parent-child tracksuits we had prepared. The little guy was bursting with energy, patting his chest proudly. "Dad, we are definitely getting first place today." Seeing his brimming confidence, I smiled and nodded. "All right, Dad will give it his all with you." The first event was the 3-legged race. A referee knelt down to tie my leg to my son's. When I turned my head, the son beside me was suddenly gone. Panic seized my chest, and I looked around frantically, only to spot a familiar little figure walking briskly toward me. I grabbed him and pulled him toward the back of the staging area, putting on a stern face to pretend I was angry. Who was just saying we were going to get first place today? If you keep running around, we won't even get last place. Surprisingly, the little guy didn't talk back the way my son normally would. He just looked up at me with sparkling eyes and nodded emphatically. "I won't run around. We'll get first place." The whistle blew, and we immediately charged toward the finish line. To my surprise, our coordination was flawless. Our steps were perfectly synchronized. We didn't stumble a single time, and we easily secured first place. We hugged each other and cheered, absolutely thrilled. The second event was the balloon transport relay. We had to carefully walk while squeezing a balloon between us. Our speed was incredible, and we won again in record time. My son hopped up and down, his face beaming with pride. And so, we kept on winning, taking first place in every single event. But slowly, I started to notice that something was off. The child beside me, although identical to my son in every physical way, had a much calmer temperament, and his movements were far more precise. I tentatively called out a name. "Julian?" "Yes?" the little guy answered in a crisp voice. As soon as the word left his mouth, he realized what he had done. He quickly slapped his hands over his mouth, his eyes filled with immense regret, and his face turned beet red. I rubbed my forehead. Everything made sense now. Coincidentally, both boys were wearing the exact same tracksuits today, and their hair was styled exactly the same. Without looking closely, it was impossible to tell them apart. Julian struggled internally for a long time before mustering the courage to whisper an apology. "I transferred to this kindergarten a little while ago. We only realized we were in the same class today at the sports meet. When he saw me earlier, he asked if I wanted to swap places and play until the event was over. I agreed. "I'm sorry, mister." He paused, then asked quietly, "Can I still come find you guys to play in the future?" The words of refusal were on the tip of my tongue, but I just couldn't force them out. It was true, however, that I had already been planning a second school transfer for my son. As time dragged on, it was only a matter of time before Serena found out. My prolonged silence gave Julian his answer. The light in his eyes slowly dimmed, and tears welled up. He turned his head away, roughly wiping his eyes with his sleeve, then turned back to give me a forced, painful smile. I understand. Seeing him trying so hard to be strong made my heart clench in agonizing pain, but there was nothing I could do. Walking toward their class's designated area, my eyes instantly locked onto the most prominent figure in the crowd, Serena. She had actually come in person. My son was standing quietly beside her, completely abandoning his usual mischievous behavior. He was acting perfectly well behaved, not causing any trouble at all. The last time I saw her, I had been too busy running away to really look at her. Now, hidden in the crowd, I observed Serena quietly. She was exactly the same as she used to be. Cold, noble, standing amidst the throng like a flower that could only be admired from afar. She made people's hearts race, yet terrified them into keeping their distance. Thinking back on it now, the fact that I had ever managed to get close to her, to share that past with her, felt like nothing more than a surreal dream. I waved at my son from a distance. He spotted me, cast a cautious glance at Serena beside him, and when she wasn't paying attention, slipped away. "You've got some nerve, tricking your own dad," I said as he reached me. My son rubbed his forehead, whispering his protests. I nudged Julian gently toward Serena's direction, grabbed my son's hand, and prepared to leave. But right at that moment, Serena's icy, oppressive voice drifted over from behind us. "Julian, where did you run off to again?" She hadn't changed at all. She still treated her child like an employee, demanding he meet adult standards. A child is not a puppet, nor a machine. He has his own thoughts and his own emotions. But Serena had never understood that. Julian explained softly, "Mom, I just needed to use the restroom. I promise I won't run around anymore." "I don't know who you're taking after with this temper lately," she scolded. "You're usually so well behaved, but today you've been squirming around like you have thorns in your seat. Are your lessons not challenging enough? Tonight, you will copy all your coursework twice when we get home." I was trembling with rage. Was it because Julian's facial features resembled mine that she was projecting all her lingering resentment from the past onto the child? Just then, a familiar male voice cut into the conversation. "Ah, we found Julian." It was Bastien. I narrowed my eyes, a deep sense of disgust rising in my gut. It seemed he had managed to stay by Serena's side all these years, doing quite well for himself. His status must have risen significantly if he was accompanying Julian to a parent-child sports day. Seeing Julian's reddened eyes fighting back tears, Bastien immediately put on a mask of gentle concern. He spoke softly. "Julian, don't blame CEO Sterling. When you disappeared, she was worried sick. We split up and looked everywhere for you. Thank goodness you're safe." Having said that, he turned to placate Serena. "CEO Sterling, Julian is still young. It's perfectly normal for him to be a bit energetic. Please don't be angry." With just a few words, he smoothed over the tense atmosphere. Back when I lived at the Sterling estate, he was always exactly like this. Outwardly gentle, but harboring deep, malicious schemes. He targeted me at every turn, constantly driving a wedge between Serena and me. I pulled my son along and continued walking toward the exit, but I could feel a sharp, piercing gaze fixed firmly on my back. "Stop right there." My chest tightened. She couldn't be calling me, could she? I didn't stop walking, pressing forward. "The one in the blue tracksuit. I'm talking to you." I glanced around. Among all the parents attending the sports meet, I was the only one wearing a blue tracksuit. My defenses shot up instantly. Even like this, she noticed me? Why single me out? I turned around, and Serena's voice rang out again, carrying an undeniable authority. I leaned down and whispered to my son, "Keep your head down. Don't let her see you." The sun was bright today, so I had purposefully worn a hat and sunglasses, wrapping myself up securely before leaving the house. I was certain she wouldn't be able to recognize me. I stood straight, tilted my head up slightly, and faked a calm tone. "Did you need something from me?" Hearing my voice, Bastien walked over, handed the child over to the nanny, and stood next to Serena, looking me up and down. "I saw Julian run over to you earlier. Do you know him?" Serena narrowed her eyes, studying me meticulously, her gaze brimming with suspicion. I had assumed the distance and the crowd would keep me hidden, completely forgetting that she was the heir to the Sterling family, raised in the cutthroat business world, uniquely sensitive to any anomalies around her. I lowered my voice, intentionally making it sound hoarse, and spoke with absolute sincerity. The child was running too fast and almost tripped. "I just caught him so he wouldn't fall, and I was just leaving when you called out to me. If you don't believe me, you can check the security cameras." Perhaps my sincere tone convinced her, or perhaps because we were at a school, she didn't want to make a scene. Serena nodded and turned to leave. Bastien, however, maintained his arrogant posture, lifting his chin as he spoke to me. "The child you helped happens to be the heir to the Sterling Group. Consider yourself lucky. CEO Sterling cares deeply about him. Take this blank check. You can cash it for $30,000 at any bank. Treat it as a reward." I kept my face completely neutral and refused calmly. It was nothing. Anyone would have helped. "I don't need a reward." He let out a derisive scoff, his face full of contempt. "Fine. Get lost, then." I turned around, grabbed my son's hand, and prepared to leave. But Serena, who had already walked a fair distance away, suddenly doubled back. Her eyes locked onto me, and she asked coldly, "What class is your child in? How old is he?" I went on high alert. The transfer paperwork hadn't been finalized yet, so I absolutely could not give her our real information. I casually fabricated a class number and age, trying my hardest to keep my eyes perfectly calm behind my sunglasses. Serena said nothing. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but I thought I saw a fleeting trace of disappointment flash through her eyes. Bastien noticed her lingering gaze and asked, "CEO Sterling? Is there a problem with him?" Serena snapped out of her daze, shook her head slightly, and reverted to her usual haughty, detached demeanor before walking away. Bastien hurried to catch up, but not before throwing one last icy glare in my direction. Once we got home, I called my son over to me. After hesitating for a long while, I finally spoke. "We are going to have to change kindergartens." My son's eyes went wide with confusion, his face crumpling with grievance. "Why?" Julian and he were in the same class, and the two brothers had already formed a deep bond. That was the power of blood ties. Nobody could tear them apart. He grabbed my hand, begging me endlessly. "Dad, I don't want to be separated from Julian. We like all the same things, and we play together so well. I don't want to lose my best friend." Seeing his devastated expression made my heart ache terribly. It was so rare for my son to find a friend he clicked with so perfectly, and denying him this would inevitably break his heart. But I couldn't gamble with our lives. If Serena discovered that my son and Julian looked exactly the same, all my secrets would be exposed. If that happened, neither my son nor I would have the right to a peaceful life ever again. I looked at him apologetically and explained softly, "I'm sorry. Because of Dad's work, we have to transfer. But I promise you, whenever I have free time, I'll bring you back to play with him, okay?" To my surprise, my son nodded maturely. He didn't cry or throw a tantrum. I immediately began preparing the transfer documents. But I never could have imagined what would happen next. On the very day I took my son to finalize the transfer, he suddenly disappeared. I panicked instantly. My mind went completely blank. Countless terrifying scenarios raced through my head. Had Serena found out? Had she sent someone to abduct my son? But thinking about it rationally, I quickly dismissed that idea. If she truly knew, she wouldn't be doing things quietly. She would have come knocking on my door directly. I ran around like a madman, searching everywhere they could possibly be. Not at the kindergarten, not at their favorite amusement park, not in the neighborhood gardens. I even drove all the way to Serena's villa. When I arrived, I saw chaos at the villa gates. Servants were rushing in and out, their faces pale with panic. My heart sank. I immediately knew that Julian was missing, too. Just as I was frantically pulling out my phone to call the police, I suddenly spotted two identical little boys across the street, holding hands and skipping happily across the road. At the corner, a massive delivery truck was barreling straight toward them at high speed. The driver was slamming on the horn desperately, but there was absolutely no time to brake. My brain buzzed loudly, shutting down all logical thought. The blood in my veins felt like it had frozen solid. Throwing all caution to the wind, I sprinted forward with every ounce of strength I had. I lunged, wrapping my arms tightly around both children, and threw us all forward in a violent roll. With a deafening screech of tires, the truck blew past, scraping violently against my back. The wind it generated whipped across my face, stinging sharply. My face was deathly pale, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. I looked down at the two children in my arms, both shaking like leaves in a storm. Thank God. Thank God they were okay. Why did you sneak out? Do you have any idea how worried your parents are? I roared, ignoring the pain. There are so many cars on the road. Do you realize how dangerous that was just now? If something had happened to you, how were we supposed to go on living? Once I was certain they were unhurt, I hardened my expression and reprimanded them severely. Knowing they had done wrong, the two boys burst into terrified tears. Between sobs, they explained, "We knew you were going to transfer and leave. Even though you said you'd bring him back to play, we felt like we might never see each other again. We just wanted to have one really good day playing together. We were afraid you'd say no, so we secretly planned it on the smartwatch and snuck out." I was both furious and amused. I really couldn't stay mad at these two little schemers. It turned out they had swapped contact info behind my back long ago and had been talking in secret. Two pairs of large, tear-filled eyes looked up at me pitifully, full of desperate pleading. "Dad, since we're already out, can you just take us to play for one day? Just one day, and then you can take Julian home. Please? Please, mister. I really love being with you guys. When I heard you were leaving, I cried all night. Just one day of playing, please?" I remained silent for a long moment. I could force myself to be cruel and reject my own son, but looking at Julian's expectant, sorrowful gaze, I simply couldn't harden my heart. "Fine. Call your mother and tell her you got lost and I found you. Tell her I'll drop you off later tonight. Don't let her worry." Although Serena was incredibly strict with Julian, I could tell she genuinely cared about the child and worried about his safety. Julian obediently nodded, lifted his smartwatch, and called Serena. Instantly, Serena's furious voice blasted through the speaker. "You've got some nerve running off!" Bastian's voice followed closely behind, thick with exasperation. Julian looked up at me pleadingly. I lowered my voice and spoke into the phone. "Don't worry, Julian ran into me. We met at the kindergarten sports day last time. He and my son are having a great time playing together. I'll bring him back later tonight." Bastian, however, refused to let it go, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Who knows if you're targeting Julian because of his status? Did you lure him out on purpose? Bring him back right now, or I'm calling the police." At that moment, Serena's cold, authoritative voice cut through again. She spoke only 4 simple words. "Bring him back tonight." With that, she hung up the phone directly. The two children instantly erupted into cheers. I couldn't help but smile helplessly. Fine. Even if I couldn't make up for the fatherly love Julian had missed all these years, before we left for good, I would give him one last day of uninhibited fun. I took them to the arcade to play the claw machines Julian had wanted to try so badly. I was pretty good at it, and soon we had a massive bag overflowing with plush toys, so many that my son couldn't even hold them all in his arms. When we were exhausted and hungry, we found a restaurant to eat. My son couldn't handle spicy food, so whenever I cooked at home, I always made 2 portions, a spicy one for me and a mild one for him. I didn't know what Julian liked, so I ordered both mild and mildly spicy dishes. To my surprise, Julian's tastes matched mine exactly. He absolutely loved spicy food. After eating and drinking our fill, I drove Julian to the gates of the villa estate and urged him to hurry inside. "Go on in. Your mom must be getting anxious." But Julian grabbed my hand, acting coquettish in a small voice. "Mister, can you walk me to my front door? Please?" My heart softened, and I let him lead me to the front door of the mansion. The moment we arrived, I saw Serena and Bastian standing there, both wearing very ugly expressions. I stopped in my tracks, a sense of dread creeping over me. Serena spoke coldly to Julian. "You've played all day. Go inside and make up your homework." "Well, it seems everything is fine here. The child has been brought back safely, so I'll be leaving now," I said. I turned on my heel, ready to walk away, but Serena's intense stare bore holes into my back, making my skin crawl. I didn't dare stick around, picking up my pace. Just as I turned, Bastian let out a cold laugh, his voice laced with hostility. "You keep showing up around Julian over and over again. What exactly are you plotting?" I offered a weary explanation. It truly is just a coincidence, believe it or not. I promise I'll stay far away from you from now on. You'll never see me again. Hearing those words, the light in Julian's eyes instantly vanished, his face overtaken by profound disappointment. It pained me to see it, but I had no other choice. Only by staying far away from them could my son and I live a safe, stable life. Pretty words. Do you really think I'd believe you? Bastian sneered. I knew you were trouble the last time we met. Trying to use Julian to get close to CEO Sterling, aren't you? Men like you, desperate to climb the social ladder by latching onto someone powerful. I've seen far too many of your kind. Bastian's whole demeanor was radiating provocation, exactly as he had been all those years ago. Anytime another man appeared around Serena, he would bristle with hostility and use every dirty trick in the book to destroy them. I couldn't be bothered to argue with him. I replied flatly, "Believe whatever you want." Serena, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly spoke up, issuing an order to the bodyguards beside her. Hold him down. I struggled frantically, glaring at her furiously. Is there a law against wearing sunglasses? I told you I have no interest in getting close to you. The last 2 times were accidents. Let me go! I said I would never appear in front of you again. Bastian smiled maliciously, stepping forward and reaching out to snatch the sunglasses off my face. Only people with shameful secrets are afraid to show their faces. Let's see who you really are. Just at that precise moment, my son charged out from behind me. His tiny body shoved furiously against the towering bodyguards, and his little fists rained blows and kicks down on Bastian. He screamed at the top of his lungs while sobbing violently. Dad! After screaming, he spread his tiny arms wide, standing protectively in front of me like a brave, fierce little beast. When Bastian and the bodyguards got a clear look at my son's face, they all froze in absolute shock. A bodyguard gasped, "Little master?" Hearing the commotion, Serena turned her head. The moment she laid eyes on my son, she froze completely. All the color drained from her face, leaving it ashen. Her eyes were wide with sheer disbelief and shock. Julian roughly broke free from the nanny's grasp and sprinted over to my side, too. He spread his arms wide, mirroring my son, and yelled, "Nobody is allowed to kill him! Anyone who hurts him has to go through me!" 2 identical little figures, standing left and right, fiercely protecting me. Everyone present stared in stunned silence. The atmosphere grew incredibly heavy and grim. Serena walked toward me rapidly. She reached out a trembling hand, wanting to touch my face. But upon meeting my freezing, detached glare, she slowly pulled her hand back. Her gaze, however, remained glued to my face, carrying 5 years of agonizing longing and suffering. "Arthur, I've looked for you for 5 years," she choked out. That single sentence left my son deeply confused. He looked left at me, then right at Serena, his face a picture of bewilderment. Finally unable to hold it in, he asked quietly, "Do you know my dad?" Serena crouched down. With violently trembling hands, she gently touched my son's face, his arms, his shoulders. The tears she had been fighting finally broke free, falling fast and heavy. Her voice shook with choked sobs. "I finally get to see you. Your eyes, they look exactly like mine." I let out a cold scoff, my tone glacial. "Well, you've seen him now. It's time for us to go." Saying that, I grabbed my son's hand, ready to leave. Instantly, a row of bodyguards stepped forward, completely blocking our path. I turned my head and glared coldly at Serena. "What is the meaning of this?" Serena dropped her usual icy, arrogant facade. Her voice was incredibly soft and gentle. "You ran for 5 years. Now that we finally see each other again, are you still going to leave?" I knew that with my meager strength alone, it was impossible to take my son away today. I looked back at her and gave a bitter, mocking smile. "Since you found me out, what's the point of running? However, all our belongings are still at the old apartment. I'm going to take my son to get our things." Serena hadn't built the Sterling Group into an empire by being naive. She gave a faint smile, her tone resolute. "Arthur, I'm not that stupid. I finally found you. What if you run away again?" Bastian immediately interjected, "I'll go with him to get his things. With me watching him and the kid, he definitely won't be able to run." Serena remained silent for a moment before nodding slightly in agreement. I let out a breath of relief. Back then, Bastian was the one who had helped me escape. Surely, he would help me again this time. Just as I turned to leave, Julian suddenly grabbed the corner of my shirt, whispering, "I want to go too." I looked down and comforted him softly. "Be good. Once we pack our bags, we'll come back and pick you up." But Julian stubbornly shook his head, his little face a mask of pure determination. "No, I have to go with you." Left with no choice, I looked at Serena. "We are going to pack luggage. Taking Julian along will be inconvenient. Take him back inside." To my surprise, Serena simply nudged Julian toward me and said casually, "Fine, then. If anything happens, Bastien will just bring him back." During the car ride, the two little boys swarmed me, chattering nonstop. They kept asking why they looked exactly alike, why one lived with Dad and the other lived with Mom. I closed my eyes and pretended not to hear them. I had absolutely no desire to return to Serena's side. I didn't want to be dragged back into the messy, vicious politics of wealthy families. If I admitted our true identities right now, the trauma inflicted on the children would be catastrophic. Seeing that I wouldn't answer, the children turned their questions to Bastien. Bastien stayed silent for a few agonizing seconds before he suddenly spoke, his voice dripping with venom, resentment, and bitter frustration. "Why did you come back? 5 years ago, I gave you a way out. I told you to go far, far away. Do you have any idea that I was just on the verge of finally winning her heart? I was so close to having everything." Before I could process his words, Julian's eyes widened in confusion. "Uncle Bastien, what are you talking about?" Bastien's face twisted into something monstrous. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "You little bastard! You don't have the right to say my name! I have had enough of you! Since you're having a grand family reunion, you can all disappear together today." My heart seized. I knew things were about to go horribly wrong, and I immediately lunged for the steering wheel. Both children were in the car. I had to ensure their safety. But Bastien had come prepared. He pulled a heavy iron hammer from beneath his seat and brought it down viciously onto my shoulder. Blinding pain erupted through my body, my vision blacking out for a second as I collapsed back onto the rear seat. Blood began to pour from the wound on my shoulder, hot and wet, soaking rapidly through my shirt. The two children began to scream and cry in absolute terror. They threw themselves onto me, using their tiny hands to press down on my bleeding wound, sobbing hysterically. "Dad! Mister!" I forced my eyes open, staring at Bastien's deranged face. My voice was hoarse. "These children are Serena's flesh and blood. They are the heirs to the Sterling family. Won't she punish you?" Bastien's face contorted with madness. "Those two bastard children don't deserve to be hers. Back when she was giving birth, I wanted to kill them then. Unfortunately, she watched them too closely. But now, my chance has finally come. As long as I eliminate you all, I can comfort her in her grief, marry into the family, and take over everything the Sterling family owns. It's all about to come true." With those final words, he slammed on the brakes, stopping the car right at the edge of a steep cliff. His eyes were entirely consumed by murderous intent. "It's time for you to say goodbye to this world. In your next life, try not to get in my way." He stepped out, slammed the driver's side door shut, and walked around to the back of the car, violently shoving it toward the precipice. As young as they were, the children fully understood that Bastien was trying to kill them. My son gripped Julian's clothes tightly, tears streaming down his face like a broken string of pearls. Julian's lips were quivering violently, so terrified he couldn't even make a sound to cry. He had probably never imagined that the Uncle Bastien, who always brought them candy and acted so gentle, could suddenly turn into a monster trying to murder them. I struggled to gather the two violently shaking children into my arms. The wound on my back tore agonizingly as we jolted against the seats, the hot blood seeping through my clothes and pooling into a dark stain on the upholstery. Using my hoarse voice, I repeated over and over, "Don't be afraid. Dad is here." At the same time, I used every last ounce of strength I possessed to kick the car door. Clang! Clang! The deafening sound of metal striking metal echoed inside the confined cabin. But the door felt as if it had been welded shut. It wouldn't budge a single millimeter. With every desperate kick, my ankle sent a shock of blinding agony up my leg. Outside the window, the terrifying drop of the cliff became clearer and clearer. A bitter wind whipped up loose gravel, slamming it against the glass with a screeching sound. Below the cliff was an abyss of impenetrable fog. The car was sliding backward with terrifying speed, inching closer and closer to the drop. The rear wheels were already hanging over empty air. We could plummet at any second, right at the absolute brink of destruction. The deafening roar of a high-performance engine echoed from the distance, slicing through the eerie silence of the valley like a thunderclap. Blinding headlights swept directly over us, forcing Bastian to instinctively shield his eyes. Immediately following the light came Serena's furious roar, carrying over the whistling wind to rattle the entire valley. Her voice was laced with pure despair, rage, and terror. Every single word was spat out with lethal force. "Bastian, you dare lay a finger on my man and my children?" The collision sounded like a bomb going off, threatening to shatter our eardrums. Our car rocked violently as Serena's vehicle slammed into Bastian's, knocking our car heavily away from the cliff edge and sending it crashing back onto solid ground. Bastian was thrown backward by the immense shockwave of the impact, his face instantly draining of all color. His eyes filled with wild panic as he realized his grand scheme was utterly destroyed. He whipped around and began scrambling down the mountain, half running and half crawling, desperate just to escape with his life. But he barely made it a few steps before he was entirely surrounded by heavily armed police officers rushing in from all directions. Over a dozen officers aimed their weapons at him, their expressions completely grim, locking down his every avenue of escape, along with all his ambition, jealousy, and madness. He looked up at Serena, his eyes brimming with toxic resentment and unwillingness to accept defeat. He screamed, "Serena, I did all of this for you! I loved you so much! Why are you defending this worthless country boy?" Serena didn't even spare him a glance. Her eyes were locked onto the crushed car where the children and I were trapped. Her face was as pale as a sheet of paper. She rushed over like a hurricane, screaming my name as she ran, her voice trembling and breaking into sobs. "Arthur! Arthur, hold on! Are the children okay?" The next second, Bastian was forced face down into the dirt by the police. The metal handcuffs glinted sharply in the moonlight. He suddenly threw his head back and laughed at the sky, a shrill, hysterical, thoroughly insane sound. "Arthur, you think you've won? Do you know that 5 years ago, when you took that child, I hid something inside his swaddle blanket? You will never figure out what it is." Serena whipped around, marched over, and delivered a brutal, resounding slap across Bastian's face. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but he only laughed harder, more maniacally. "I won't tell you. I want you to live the rest of your miserable lives in constant terror." Serena turned back to me, her face ghostly pale. Frantically, she began tearing through the children's clothes and their old blankets, checking every seam over and over again, but she found nothing. Her voice was quivering violently. What did he put in there?" The agony radiating from my back was causing my vision to fade to black, but I still managed to grab her hand and squeeze it. I whispered weakly, "Go to the hospital first. Get the children fully examined." In the ambulance, I stared at the children's peacefully sleeping faces, Bastian's parting words echoing endlessly in my skull. Once we arrived at the hospital, Serena utilized every connection she had. She had both children run through exhaustive x-rays, Connecticut scans, and extensive blood toxicology screenings overnight. They tested for absolutely everything they could think of. At 4 a.m., the results finally came back. Everything was completely normal. I let out a massive sigh of relief, but that invisible thorn remained lodged deep in my heart. Serena sat on a bench in the hospital corridor, her head buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking softly. She looked up, her eyes as red as a rabbit's, her voice raspy. "I'm so sorry. This is all because of me." I stayed silent for a long time. Finally, I offered only a single sentence. "Let's focus on recovering first." The adrenaline that had kept my nerves wound incredibly tight suddenly evaporated. The agonizing pain in my back and shoulder crashed over me like a tidal wave. The wounds had been completely torn open again during the struggle, and blood was soaking heavily through my clothes. My vision blurred and quickly darkened. The sound of the children crying grew fainter and more distant in my ears. I could feel my strength seeping away drop by drop. Right before I closed my eyes, my last sight was Serena throwing herself against my stretcher, tears pouring endlessly down her face. She looked utterly terrified and panicked. She kept screaming my name, her voice cracking and tearing until it was so hoarse I could barely hear it. "Hurry, get a doctor! Get the best doctors in the hospital! Use the best medicine!" Her voice shook, her hands shook. She was trembling so violently she couldn't even hold the children properly. My children? My man. Absolutely nothing can happen to them. If anything happens to him, I'll make everyone in this hospital pay. When I opened my eyes again, the harsh, blinding white light forced me to squint. I was lying in a hospital bed, my body aching deeply and drained of all energy. The wounds on my back and shoulder throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. Every breath I took pulled at the torn tissue, hurting so much I had to suck in sharp breaths of cold air. I slowly turned my head. In the beds on either side of me, a child was sleeping soundly. My son and Julian were nestled as close to me as possible, dried tear tracks still visible on their cheeks. Their breathing was even and calm. Seeing them sleeping so peacefully filled me with an overwhelming sense of tenderness. As long as they were safe, any amount of pain I suffered was worth it. I slowly tried to lift my arm to stroke their heads, but the slight movement sent a white-hot spike of agony through my back. Cold sweat instantly broke out on my forehead. At that moment, the door to the ward was pushed open gently, and Serena walked in. Her eyes were heavily bloodshot. It was obvious she hadn't slept a wink all night. She was still wearing the same crumpled business suit from yesterday, her hair tied up haphazardly. All of her usual arrogant, unapproachable frostiness was gone, replaced by profound exhaustion, gentleness, and an abundance of caution. When she saw that I was awake, her eyes lit up as if she had just found the light of the entire world. She hurried over to the side of the bed, her movements incredibly light, terrified of causing me pain. Her voice was tender, carrying a hesitant, careful probing. "You're awake. How are you feeling? You have a mild concussion, massive abrasions on your back, and severe soft tissue contusions. You need plenty of rest. Please, whatever you do, don't move around. I already had the head of pediatrics run comprehensive checks on the boys. They're just shaken up. They don't have a single scratch on them." Seeing her acting so humble and careful, the memories I had buried deep inside for 5 long years flooded into my brain like a breached dam, as vivid and clear as if they had happened yesterday. Originally, I was just a dirt-poor student from a remote rural village. My family was destitute. We couldn't even afford tuition fees. I survived on dry steamed buns every day, barely scraping by with one meager meal. Serena had accidentally seen my outstanding academic records on a charity sponsorship list. Moved by my sheer dedication and hard work, she proactively offered to fully fund my education. She brought me out of the countryside and into the city, providing me with a good life and an exceptional learning environment so I wouldn't have to worry about starving and could focus entirely on my studies. To repay her immense kindness, I studied like a man possessed. I never dared slack off for a single second. I was always the first to arrive in the classroom and the last to leave, staying up late to study every single night without ever taking a break. Eventually, with phenomenal grades, I tested into the elite high-end design program that the Sterling Group needed most. I swore to myself that after graduation, I would dedicate my life to helping her, spending the rest of my days repaying her grace. But spending every day together, my feelings for her slowly began to change. What started as gratitude and admiration morphed into a deep, uncontrollable romantic love. But I was acutely aware of my own status. The gap between us was astronomical. She was the high and mighty princess of the wealthy circle, the sole heir to the Sterling family empire, wielding immense wealth and power. I was a penniless country boy with absolutely nothing to my name. I was completely unworthy of her. And so, I kept my love buried deep inside my heart. I didn't dare confess, didn't dare get too close. I simply guarded her silently from the shadows. Until one day, Serena came to me. Under a sky filled with brilliant stars, her face flushed red, her eyes a mix of shyness and unshakable resolve. She tremblingly kissed my lips and confessed her feelings to me, saying she loved me and didn't care about the disparity in our social standings. That night, we became a couple. I thought I had finally grasped true happiness, that we would be together forever. But the very next day, when she took me back to the Sterling family estate, her attitude underwent a terrifying shift. She began treating me hot and cold, acting distant and indifferent. She even allowed the other student she sponsored, Bastian, to bully and humiliate me at will. Countless times, I sought her out, desperately wanting to ask her what had gone wrong, begging for an explanation. But she always avoided me. Either the servants blocked me at the door, or she simply turned and walked away, never giving me a chance to speak. I couldn't understand it. What on earth had happened overnight to make her change so completely? She went from a gentle, loving partner to a complete stranger. Later, Serena became pregnant. I naively believed that with a child on the way, The barriers between us would completely dissolve. I thought she would return to my side, and we would become a whole, real family. But it was nothing more than my own foolish fantasy. One day, she suddenly ordered her men to lock me inside the basement of the Sterling estate. I wasn't allowed to leave. No one was allowed to speak to me. She cut me off completely from the outside world. The basement was pitch black and suffocatingly damp. Water constantly seeped through the concrete walls, and piles of rotting cardboard boxes in the corners filled the air with a thick smell of mildew. In the dead of night, it was so quiet the only sounds I could hear were my own heartbeat and breathing. It was an icy, desolate prison. I thought about the gentle way she used to call my name, about the unwavering determination in her eyes when she confessed her love. Silent tears fell onto the freezing concrete floor, blooming into dark, wet stains. My heart grew colder and colder, slowly dying piece by piece. I don't know how much time passed before Bastien strutted through the heavy door, a smug, victorious sneer plastered on his face. He leaned casually against the doorframe, looking down at me from his high horse as if I were a pathetic ant. "Arthur, stop dreaming," he spat. "Serena never loved you. You were just a passing whim to her, a little toy she played with and threw away when she got bored. Let me tell you some news. She gave birth. A pair of twin boys. The Sterling family finally has its heirs. A poor wretch like you should have the basic decency to roll out of her life. Stop being such an eyesore." I clenched my fists so hard my fingernails dug into my palms, drawing blood. I glared at him with dead eyes and demanded, "Where is Serena? I want to see her. I want to ask her face to face." Bastien let out a mocking laugh, his gaze thick with disdain. "See her? Do you think you're worthy? She doesn't want to look at you. The sight of you disgusts her. I can let you go, but you must promise me one thing. You will never, ever return to the capital, and you will never appear in front of her again. Otherwise, I will make sure neither you nor your child make it out alive. I keep my promises." To ensure my child could survive, I had no choice but to compromise. Swallowing my humiliation and pain, I took advantage of Serena's postnatal weakness, and under Bastien's orchestration, I took one of the newborn twins. Following the escape route he provided, I fled the capital in the dead of night, traveling overseas to start an entirely new life under the radar. On that train, holding my tiny baby wrapped in a simple blanket, listening to the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels on the tracks, I watched the scenery blur past the window. I had no idea where the future would take me. The only thought in my head was to raise my child well, to never return to the capital, to never disrupt Serena's life, and to live out the rest of my days in quiet peace. Now, lying in this hospital bed, looking at the exhausted, humble woman standing before me, the grievances, hatred, confusion, and agony I had suppressed for 5 years violently erupted. I couldn't hold it back any longer. Propping my weakened body up, I slowly sat up. The wounds on my back screamed in protest, causing cold sweat to pour down my face. I locked eyes with her, speaking every single word slowly, my voice dripping with biting coldness and 5 years of tortured pain. "Serena, since you hated me so much back then, since you truly believed I was beneath you, why did you approach me in the first place? Why did you kiss me? You turned around and treated me like garbage. Do you have any idea how agonizing that time was for me?" The servants mocked me, whispering behind my back that I was just a country bumpkin scheming to marry into wealth. I swallowed every bit of that humiliation. For you, I was willing to endure anything. But why did you have your men lock me in that dark, rotting basement? You completely ignored my existence, leaving me there to rot, indifferent to whether I lived or died. What I simply don't understand is, if you despised me so deeply, if you couldn't stand the sight of me, why did you let me go 5 years ago? And why have you spent the last 5 years desperately searching for me? What exactly is it that you want? My rapid-fire questions drove into Serena's heart like a barrage of daggers. Her face instantly lost all its color, turning deathly white, and her body began to shake uncontrollably. Tears instantly flooded her eyes. She panicked, desperately grabbing my hand. Her fingers were ice-cold and trembling violently. Her voice broke with heavy sobs. "No, Arthur, it wasn't like what you thought. I never hated you. My love for you never changed, not even for a second. It was all Bastien's doing. He had always been obsessed with me, and he was insanely jealous that you had my heart, so he meticulously plotted to frame you. He forged an audio recording and brought it to me. He hired people to splice clips of your voice together, making it sound like you confessed that you only approached me for my money, that your goal was to steal the Sterling Group's assets, and that you were plotting to destroy me and leave me with nothing. I was so angry and terrified. I didn't want to believe it, but Bastian's forgery was too perfect. There were no flaws. I was blinded by jealousy and fear, but in my heart, I couldn't bear to let you go. I loved you too much. That's why I locked you in the basement. I just wanted to keep you by my side. I foolishly believed that if I kept you locked up next to me, you couldn't hurt me. Locking you in that basement is the biggest regret of my entire life. Then you escaped. You vanished completely from my world. I went insane looking for you. I searched the entire globe, mobilized every connection the Sterling family had, poured in all our resources, but I couldn't find a single trace. I even thought to myself, even if you really were just after my money, even if you truly wanted to steal the Sterling fortune, I wouldn't care. I'd give you everything the Sterling family owns, as long as you came back to me. This time, when Bastian volunteered to drive you and the children back, my gut told me something was terribly wrong. So I made him take my car. My car has recording equipment linked directly to my phone. I heard every single insane word he said in that car. I called the police immediately and drove like a maniac to get to you. The only thought in my mind was that I had to save you and my children. I was just seconds away from losing you forever. I truly didn't dare to imagine how I could go on living without you. Her voice choked, so thick with tears she could barely speak. Huge tears rolled down her cheeks, landing on the back of my hand. They felt scalding hot. She reached out, wanting to touch my face, to wipe the cold sweat from my forehead, but then she timidly pulled her hand back, terrified I would reject her, terrified I hated her, terrified I would push her away again. She looked at me, her eyes filled with desperate pleading, agonizing regret, and pure humility. Her voice was as light as a feather, carrying a desperate, fragile hope. Arthur, all the mistakes in the past were mine. I know I broke your heart completely. I am willing to spend the rest of my life making it up to you and the children. I'll do anything you ask, without a single word of complaint. Can we just be a family of 4 from now on? Please? I swear I'll never be arrogant again. I'll never listen to others' malicious lies again. I will love you with all my heart, and I will love our 2 boys. I'll give them a complete, happy, warm home. Please? I slowly pulled my hand free from her grasp, avoiding her touch. I gently stroked the faces of my 2 sleeping sons. My heart felt as cold as ice. My tone was utterly serene, yet carried an unshakable, immovable finality. Serena. My love for you was ground into dust by 5 years of misunderstandings, 5 years of agony, 5 years of running, and 5 years of painful longing. There is nothing left. It's completely gone, and it can never be recovered. The man I am now wants nothing from you. I don't desire anything. All I want is to live a good, peaceful life with my sons. Safe, stable, simple, and happy. That is enough for me. Just as the words left my mouth, the 2 children, seemingly roused by our voices, groggily opened their eyes. The moment they realized I was awake, they were instantly wide alert, their eyes shining with bright joy. They threw themselves into my arms. Their little bodies felt so warm, so incredibly soft. "Dad! Dad!" they yelled together in their sweet, childish voices. I answered them happily, hugging both of them tightly against my chest. My nose stung, and my eyes grew hot. My heart felt simultaneously warm and painfully tender. Julian lay against my chest, his little face fraught with insecurity and fear. The dark circles under his eyes were prominent. He gently tugged at my hand, asking in a small, tearful voice, "Dad, are you going to leave again? Do you not want Julian anymore? I promise I'll be so good. I'll listen to you, I'll study hard, and I'll never make you angry." I remained silent for a moment. Looking into his hopeful, terrified eyes, my heart melted completely. I gave him a gentle nod. Some paths can only be walked alone. Some pains must be carried silently. Julian's tears spilled over instantly, falling like broken pearls. He gripped my hand with all his might, pleading desperately through his sobs. "Dad, can you please take me with you? I don't want to be away from you. I want to live with you. I want to play with my brother. I want to see you every single day." Then, gathering all his courage, he turned his head to look at Serena. His little face was set with total sincerity and determination. He whispered, "Mom, Can I go live with Dad for a while? Please? I swear I'll be good. I won't make Dad mad. And I'll miss you, Mom. I fully expected Serena to object, to aggressively shut him down exactly as she would have in the past. To my utter shock, she didn't hesitate for even a second. She agreed immediately. Her eyes were red, and her voice was so tender it felt like it could drip water. Okay, Mom promises you. You can go live with Dad, and Mom will come visit you every week. I'll bring you delicious food and play with you, all right? Then she turned back to me. Her eyes were filled with desperate yearning and painful humility. Carrying a deeply cautious plea, her voice was so soft, as if she were terrified of scaring me away. Arthur, can you take me with you, too? Please? I want to raise the children together with you. I want to give them a complete home. I want to atone for my sins. I want to love you properly. I looked at her and gently shook my head. My tone was resolute, leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. I'm sorry. I can't. Her body swayed violently, and her face went even paler. She quickly grabbed the railing of the hospital bed just to keep herself standing. The light in her eyes extinguished piece by piece, replaced entirely by profound loss, sorrow, and absolute despair. I spent a full week recuperating in the hospital, and my body slowly began to recover. On the day of my discharge, Serena arrived at the hospital bright and early. She packed all my belongings for me, acting incredibly cautious the entire time, terrified of saying the wrong word or making the wrong move, terrified she might anger me or make me disappear again. After leaving the hospital, I accompanied Julian back to the Sterling villa to pack his things. Pushing open those familiar carved wooden doors, the crystal chandelier in the grand living room was still just as dazzling and imposing. But the suffocating atmosphere of the past, the coldness, the vicious scheming, seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a slight touch of domestic warmth and gentleness. Julian, happy as a little bird, bounded up the stairs to his bedroom. He quickly came running back down, hugging a small, severely faded teddy bear to his chest. The bear's ear was slightly torn, but it had been washed spotlessly clean and clearly kept in excellent condition. He held the bear up to me, his little face beaming with joy and pride. Dad, look! This is the little bear you secretly tucked in with me back then. I've kept it with me this whole time. I hug it to sleep every single night. I never lost it. I was stunned for a moment, and memories from 5 years ago came rushing back. When Julian was just a newborn, taking advantage of the servants not paying attention, I had dug through a pile of absurdly expensive imported toys and picked out this softest, most comfortable, yet incredibly ordinary little bear. I had secretly tucked it into his swaddle, hoping it would accompany him as he grew, giving him a sliver of warmth. I never expected that, after 5 whole years, he would still have it, treating it like his most precious treasure. Serena, who had been following silently behind us, walked into the bedroom. She opened the wardrobe and took out Julian's clothes piece by piece, folding them with meticulous care. She gently placed them into a suitcase adorned with cartoon bears. Her movements were incredibly light, and she didn't speak a single word the entire time. But her eyes remained persistently red, tears swirling in her eyes, forcefully held back from falling. We returned to our little home. Even though it was just a modest 3-bedroom apartment, neither spacious nor imposing, completely lacking the luxury of the Sterling estate, it was filled with warmth in every corner. It radiated the aura of a real life, simple yet happy. Ever since Julian moved in, the apartment was filled with laughter every single day. The 2 boys chased each other around, playing with toys together, watching cartoons together, sharing snacks, and going to school and coming back together. The bond between the brothers grew stronger by the day, making them virtually inseparable. Blood ties truly are unbreakable. Every morning, the moment I set breakfast on the table, the boys would scramble over, fighting to see who could get the biggest fried egg, not to eat it themselves, but shouting, "I'm saving this for Dad! Dad works so hard! He has to eat the biggest one! Dad is the hardest worker!" In the evenings, when I got home from work, they would throw themselves into my arms, hugging my legs and acting spoiled. They would babble about the funny things that happened at kindergarten, telling me who the teacher praised and who made a new friend. At night, I would sit on the sofa with a boy pressed tightly against each of my sides. They would beg me for bedtime stories, demanding another one the moment the first ended, until their eyelids grew heavy and they were too sleepy to fight it anymore, finally obediently going to bed. They were unbelievably cute. Serena visited the children every single week. I never stopped her. After all, She was their biological mother. From both a logical and emotional standpoint, I had no right to refuse her. The children needed a mother's love. Whenever she came, she always brought an overwhelming amount of things. Snacks the boys loved, fresh imported fruits, beautiful new clothes, puzzles, comic books, stationery, stuffing the cabinets in the apartment completely full. She also proactively helped me cook, tidy up the rooms, and clean the apartment, making the place spotless and organized. Her cooking was actually fantastic, and she always made the dishes the children and I loved most. She completely shed her former arrogant, icy persona, becoming gentle, virtuous, and considerate, just like an ordinary, loving mother. Every time she had to leave, she was incredibly reluctant. She would stand by the door and watch the boys play for a long, long time, her eyes overflowing with longing and attachment. Only when the children waved goodbye would she finally turn around, walking away while looking back over her shoulder with every step, her silhouette looking terribly lonely and forlorn. I knew she was slowly changing, learning how to be a good mother, trying to make up for the debt she owed the children, and attempting to heal the damage she had done to me. It's just that some wounds, once inflicted, mean you can never go back to how things used to be. But a child's upbringing requires both a father and a mother. Even though I couldn't forgive her for the mistakes of her past, I didn't want the children to lose their mother's love either. This peaceful coexistence was the only way forward. For the sake of the kids, we lived our separate lives in harmony. This routine continued for 2 months. I truly believed life would just carry on in this peaceful manner forever. But one evening, Serena arrived much earlier than usual, and her expression was completely off. When she walked through the door, she wasn't carrying her usual mountains of bags. She was just clutching her phone, her knuckles white from the grip. The boys were in the living room building Legos. Seeing her, they immediately lunged over, calling out, "Mom!" She crouched down and hugged them, her smile clearly forced. Beneath her eyes lay a heavy, unconcealable exhaustion and severe anxiety. I leaned against the kitchen doorframe, drying my freshly washed hands. "What happened?" I asked. She told the kids to go play in their room, then walked over to me. She stayed silent for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice incredibly tight. "Arthur, my father knows." My heart skipped a beat, but I maintained a calm facade. "Knows what?" "He knows about the children. He knows you're back. He knows Julian is living here with you." Her voice dropped lower and lower. "He called me back to the family estate this afternoon and flew into a terrifying rage. He said the Sterling family bloodline absolutely cannot be left to wander outside, and they certainly cannot be raised by a..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood perfectly. Raised by a poor nobody. A rural student they once sponsored. An outsider completely unworthy of crossing the Sterling family's threshold. I let out a cold laugh. "So? What does he want?" Serena looked up, her eyes red. "He wants me to bring both children back to the estate, and he forbids me from ever seeing you again. He said he's going to hire the best lawyers in the country. If I don't comply, he'll press charges against you for kidnapping the Sterling heirs and have you thrown in prison." The towel in my hands hit the floor. Press charges? Kidnapping? 5 years ago, Bastian was the one who deliberately let me go, but I had absolutely no proof of that. I knew all too well how much power the Sterling family wielded in the capital. For them, sending an ordinary citizen to jail was as easy as crushing an ant. "You aren't going to agree to that, are you?" I looked at her, my voice quiet but probing. Serena's tears finally broke free. She grabbed my hand, gripping it fiercely. "Of course I won't agree! But Arthur, you don't know my father. He is a man of his word. He's already contacting lawyers, and he's having people investigate every single thing you've done abroad over the past 5 years, trying to dig up any minor infraction to use against you. He even said that if legal methods don't work, he has other ways." Other ways. Those 2 words felt like a bucket of ice water dumped over my head. I knew the Sterling family's origins. They hadn't secured their dominant position in the capital solely by playing fair in the boardroom. I took a deep breath and pulled my hand free from hers. "So you came here today to warn me to get ready? To tell me I have to either hand over my children or prepare to have my life destroyed?" "No!" Serena panicked, her voice cracking. "I came to tell you that I won't let him get away with it. I'm already contacting my own legal team. There are board members within the Sterling Group who support me. If my father insists on tearing this family apart, I will fight him to the bitter end." As she spoke, she pulled a document from her bag and handed it to me. "I had my lawyers draft this custody agreement, and I've already signed it." It states clearly that we have joint custody of both children and that you hold fully equal guardianship rights. No one has the authority to strip you of that. I looked down at the document, a storm of complicated emotions churning in my chest. The agreement was highly professional, every clause meticulously airtight. It was obvious she had put immense effort into it. But I knew that against a titan like the Sterling family, a piece of paper was practically useless. "Serena," I said, "have you thought about what your father will do to you if you stand with me?" She flinched slightly, then gave a bitter smile. "At worst, he strips me of my title as CEO, freezes my assets, and kicks me out of the family. I don't care about any of that. The only things I care about are you and the children." I opened my mouth, wanting to say something, but ultimately swallowed the words. That night, Serena didn't leave. She stayed to eat dinner with the boys, bathed them, and told them stories until they fell asleep. I sat in the living room, watching her move about the house, an indescribable wave of emotion washing over me. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by a ringing phone. It was Serena's. She answered it, and her face instantly drained of all color. "What's wrong?" I asked. She hung up, her lips trembling. "My father sent men to your apartment building. They claimed you were illegally occupying Sterling property and forcibly evicted us. The building manager just called me. All of your belongings have been thrown out onto the street downstairs." I shot up from the sofa, my brain buzzing. That apartment wasn't huge, but it was the nest where the boys and I had built a life over these past months. It held my son's toys, his comic books, his clothes, and all the things Julian had brought with him. What right did he have? I gritted my teeth. I rented that place myself. The lease is in my name. Serena grabbed my arm. "It's no use. The developer who owns that building is a subsidiary of the Sterling Group. One phone call from my father is all it takes for the management to tear up your contract. Arthur, don't panic. I've already had someone book a suite at a hotel downtown. You and the boys move there for now. I'll handle the apartment situation." I was shaking all over. Not from fear, but from blinding rage. 5 years ago, the Sterling family threw me out like trash. 5 years later, they were trying to pull the exact same stunt. I, Arthur, may be poor, and I may not have a powerful family backing me, but I have my dignity. Early the next morning, I asked Serena to watch the boys at the hotel, and I went back to the apartment building alone. Sure enough, a massive pile of belongings was unceremoniously dumped on the concrete. Clothes were scattered everywhere. Comic books had been trampled and crumpled. Julian's severely faded teddy bear was nowhere to be seen. I crouched down and began picking things up, piece by piece, the dirt caking under my fingernails. A few elderly neighbors stood nearby, pointing and whispering amongst themselves. I ignored them, stuffing everything into a borrowed woven sack, hauling it to my car load by load. Just then, a sleek black Maybach rolled to a smooth stop right in front of me. The door opened, and a man in his 60s stepped out. His hair was silver, he wore a flawlessly tailored light-colored suit, and his eyes were as sharp as knives. It was Victor Sterling, Serena's father, the absolute ruler of the Sterling Group. I had seen photos of him online, but in person, his oppressive aura was suffocating. He glanced at the mess on the ground, then looked at me, a condescending sneer on his face. I dropped the clothes I was holding. Victor's expression darkened, and the two massive bodyguards behind him took a threatening step forward. "Mr. Sterling," I said, looking him dead in the eye, pronouncing every word with iron resolve. 5 years ago, your daughter was the one who approached me. The children are my biological flesh and blood. I have never kidnapped anyone. As for my ability to provide, I raised my son perfectly well overseas for 5 years without taking a single penny from the Sterling family. If you want to take this to court, I am more than ready to fight you." Victor let out a chilling laugh. "Fight me? What exactly do you plan to fight me with? Would your entire month's salary even cover an hour of my lawyer's fees?" He turned toward his car, pausing before he got in. "I am giving you 2 days. Bring both children back to the Sterling estate. Otherwise, you won't just lose your job. You will lose your freedom. Young man, don't be ungrateful when you're given an out." The Maybach sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust. I stood rooted to the spot, my fists clenched so tightly my fingernails bit deeply into my palms. That night, I took the boys to the hotel Serena had booked. The two little guys had no idea what was really going on. They just thought staying in a hotel was an exciting adventure, bouncing happily on the beds. I sat by the window, staring at the city lights, chain-smoking cigarette after cigarette. Serena pushed the door open. Seeing the cigarette in my hand, she paused for a moment but didn't say anything, simply walking over and cracking the window open a bit wider. "Arthur, I've contacted the best family law attorney in the capital. We're meeting him tomorrow morning," she said softly. "I know my father's tactics. We have to be thoroughly prepared." I crushed the cigarette out and turned to look at her. "Serena, tell me the truth. Your father isn't just after the children, is he?" Her eyes flickered, but she remained silent. "He wants to completely sever any ties you have to me, right?" I pressed on. "He forces you to take the kids, and then he's going to marry you off to someone of equal status, forcing you to forget I ever existed." Serena bit her lip hard, tears welling up in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. "He's already arranged a marriage candidate for me, the eldest son of the Joe family. Our families have been close for generations, and they've always wanted an alliance. My father said if I refuse, he'll what? He'll dig up your entire past and expose it to the media. He'll paint you as a scheming, manipulative con artist trying to leech off a wealthy family. He'll make sure you can never show your face in this country again." Serena finally broke down, sobbing. "Arthur, I'm so sorry. I ruined you. If I hadn't been so weak and indecisive 5 years ago, if I hadn't listened to Bastian's lies, our family wouldn't have been driven to this." Seeing her cry, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. I had claimed my love for her was dead, but seeing her like this, it still hurt. "Perhaps some things aren't as easy to let go of as we pretend." "Stop crying," I said, handing her a tissue. "Crying won't solve anything. Your father isn't just backing you into a corner, he's backing me into one. He thinks I'll realize the odds are impossible and voluntarily give up the kids." Are you going to give up?" she asked, looking at me with red eyes. I gave a bitter chuckle. "Give up? If I were the type to give up, I wouldn't have fled the country with my son 5 years ago." That night, Serena and I talked for a long time. She told me she had been secretly reaching out to several founding board members of the Sterling Group. These were people who had built the empire alongside her mother, fiercely loyal to her mother's legacy and highly protective of Serena. If Victor insisted on acting tyrannically, these members would oppose him at the board meeting. "But I need time," Serena said. "At least a month. During this month, I can't visit you and the boys too often, or my father will get suspicious." I nodded. "Fine. Go do what you have to do. I will take care of the kids. You don't need to worry about them." She stood up to leave, walked to the door, then turned back. She hesitated for a long time before asking softly, "Arthur, if we win this, will you—" She forced a sad smile. "Never mind. Pretend I didn't say anything." Before she could finish, I took a step forward and gently pulled her into a hug. Her body went completely rigid for a second. Then she clung to my waist like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline, burying her face in my shoulder, crying until she shook. I closed my eyes, a whirlwind of indescribable emotions rushing through me. After Serena left, our days became incredibly tense. I was juggling work, taking care of the kids, and fending off Victor's relentless harassment. First, my company received an anonymous tip claiming I had committed financial fraud while working overseas. I was suspended pending an investigation. I knew this was the Sterling family applying pressure, but I couldn't prove my innocence because the so-called evidence was completely fabricated. Then came the kindergarten. The principal awkwardly informed me that several parents had complained about my twins, saying their identical appearance was strange and disrupting the other children. They heavily suggested I transfer one of them. I was practically vibrating with rage, fully aware that this was Victor's doing as well. The most crossing-the-line incident happened on the 3rd day. I took the boys to the supermarket. While checking out, we were surrounded by a group of strange men. They declared themselves Sterling family bodyguards, acting on Victor's orders to bring the young masters home. The boys were terrified and hid behind me. I shielded them, entering a tense standoff with the men. It only ended when the supermarket staff called the police, forcing them to back off. On the way back, my son asked quietly, "Dad, are those bad men going to steal Julian and me away?" Julian grabbed my hand, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad, I don't want to go back to the big house. I want to stay with you." I crouched down and pulled both boys into a tight embrace. My voice was calm but completely unwavering. "They won't. Dad will never let anyone take you away. No one." When we got back, I called Serena and told her what had happened over the last 2 days. The phone was dead silent for a long time. Then, her voice came through with a terrifying, absolute resolve. Enough. I'm not waiting anymore. What are you going to do? I had a bad feeling about this. The Sterling Group is holding a board meeting tomorrow. I'm going to formally propose removing my father from his position as chairman. I've secured the support of over 45% of the shareholders. Combined with my own 25%, I have enough to initiate a vote of no confidence. Serena's voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that broke your heart. Arthur, if I fail, I might lose absolutely everything. But if I don't do this, I'll definitely lose you and the boys. I gripped the phone, my fingers trembling slightly. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? He's your father. He is the man who hurt you and my children first, and my father second, Serena replied coldly. Besides, this is what I owe you. The next day, I didn't go to work. I stayed in the hotel room with the boys. I spent the entire day staring at my phone, waiting for Serena's updates. At 10 a.m., she sent a single text, meeting starting. After that, radio silence. The hours ticked by agonizingly. The boys seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. They were incredibly well-behaved all day, playing quietly with their Legos without making a fuss. At 2 p.m., my phone finally rang. It was Serena. Her voice was incredibly hoarse, sounding like she had been crying, or perhaps just exhausted beyond human limits. Arthur, we won. I let out a massive breath, feeling like all the bones in my body had suddenly turned to liquid. My father agreed to drop his pursuit of the children, and he won't target you anymore. In exchange, I promised not to remove him from the board for 3 years and to guarantee him a baseline dividend every year. Serena paused, then added, he also asked me to pass a message along to you. What message? He said. That boy named Arthur has a lot of nerve. I was stunned for a second, and then I couldn't help but laugh. That was probably the closest Victor Sterling would ever come to conceding defeat. He refused to soften his words, but his actions proved he had surrendered. Serena, thank you, I said. Silence stretched over the line for a few seconds. Then she spoke softly. You don't need to thank me. For all the days to come, let's just take it slowly, okay? I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. That evening, I moved out of the hotel. With Serena's help, I rented a new apartment. It was bigger than the old one, featuring 2 bedrooms and a study. The boys now had their own rooms and didn't have to cram into one bed. On our first day in the new place, Julian, clutching his recovered faded teddy bear, rolled around happily on the small bed I had made for him, smiling so widely his eyes turned into little crescents. My son grabbed my hand, pointing to an empty spot on the living room wall. Dad, let's hang a family photo right there. A family photo. I froze, the image immediately forming in my mind. The 2 boys, me, and Serena. Okay, I replied. We'll go get one taken in a couple of days. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Serena standing there, holding huge bags of meat and vegetables, fine beads of sweat dotting her forehead. I'm here to cook you guys a housewarming meal, she said with a bright smile, her gaze drifting past me to the 2 boys waving enthusiastically at her from the living room. I stepped aside to let her in. Soon, the rhythmic sound of chopping echoed from the kitchen. The boys buzzed around the counter, loudly volunteering to help. I stood in the living room, watching the scene unfold. A piece of my heart that had been frozen solid for years felt like it had finally cracked open, letting in a warm, gentle ray of light. Maybe, just maybe, life really could slowly get better. Sometime later, I saw news about Bastien on television. The court was publicly trying his attempted murder case. The evidence was irrefutable, complete with witnesses and physical proof. He confessed to everything he had done. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The news broadcast showed footage of the trial. He was wearing a prison uniform, his hair a disheveled mess, his face twisted in a hideous scowl, his eyes radiating venom. The facade of the gentle, refined gentleman was gone forever, leaving behind only a completely unhinged lunatic. A total loser. I thought that was the end of it, but Serena refused to let him off that easily. Through her covert arrangements, Bastien was constantly targeted inside the prison. He was manipulated into causing trouble, fighting with inmates, refusing to follow orders, and repeatedly violating prison regulations without showing any remorse. His sentence was continually extended, turning 25 years into 50. He would never see the outside of a prison cell for the rest of his life, paying the ultimate, perpetual price for his jealousy, malice, and madness. Watching the screen, my heart felt completely still. No anger, no resentment, just pure tranquility. I felt as if a crushing weight that had sat on my chest for 5 years had finally been lifted. I had nothing left to fear. I could finally raise my boys in peace and live a quiet life. With both my children by my side, life was incredibly happy and warm, brimming with domestic vitality. Of course, every day was also delightfully chaotic, full of hilarious and headache-inducing little dramas. Take right now, for instance. The familiar sound of an argument was echoing from the living room. "Dad, I had this toy first!" Leo marched over holding an Ultraman action figure, hiding behind my back. His little face was a mask of defiance. He put his hands on his hips and declared self-righteously, "No, I saw it first, and I grabbed it first." Julian tugged at the hem of my shirt, tilting his head back to look at me, his cheeks puffed out in anger and his little brows furrowed in an incredibly cute scowl. "Good things are supposed to be shared. You can't play favorites. He has to share." As they bickered, the two of them ended up wrestling on the floor. Pushing and shoving, toys scattered everywhere. Legos, comic books, and toy cars were strewn all over the place. The living room was an absolute disaster zone, looking as if a tornado had blown through it. This exact scenario played out almost every single day. Last time, they fought over a comic book and ripped the pages. A few days ago, they fought over grapes and shattered a plate. Yesterday, they fought over crayons and scribbled a chaotic, multicolored mess all over the wall. I decided to just pretend I didn't hear them, leaning back on the sofa and reading the newspaper. I didn't intervene, letting them resolve their own conflicts. Children's fights escalate quickly, but they blow over just as fast. The more you micromanage, the messier it gets. Sure enough, it didn't take long before I heard Julian's aggrieved but compromising voice. "Fine, you can play with it for 5 minutes, but after 5 minutes, it's my turn. No cheating. You have to keep your promise." Leo agreed instantly, his face lighting up with triumphant joy. "Deal! It's a promise! I'll give it back in 5 minutes!" I peeked over the top of my newspaper and saw the two of them huddled close together again, heads touching, happily playing with the Ultraman figure together. The fight and the pushing were already completely forgotten. The brothers were as thick as thieves, giggling joyfully. Sunlight spilled through the window, bathing them in a soft, golden glow, framing their tiny silhouettes in warmth and beauty. A peaceful, steady life. This is probably exactly what it looks like. I smiled softly to myself, my heart overflowing with absolute satisfaction and joy. There were no more vicious family politics, no more villains disrupting our lives, no more deceitful scheming, no more agonizing tangles of love and hate. There was only me, my children, and this simple, warm, happy, and peaceful reality. This chaotic, loud, yet incredibly heartwarming little life was exactly what I wanted most and what I would cherish for the rest of my days.